tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. Kua tae mai nei ki te hui nei, he tino mihi ki au koutou. Ko te mea tuatahi, ko te karakia timatatanga. Nō reira, whiti ora ki te whai au ki te ao marama, whiti ki runga, whiti ki raro, e ngū ki te kōhatu, e ngū ki te rākau, tītaha ki tēnei taha, tītaha ki tērā taha, tūturu whakamau ki a tīna, haumi e hui e, tāi ki e. So kia ora koutou, my name's Shaun Ogilvie, no Te Arawa me Ngāti Awa hau, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this inaugural Biological Heritage webinar on behalf of myself and my co-director of the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, Daniel Patrick. We'd like to welcome everybody in. I'll be taking the reins for the first of the webinars, and as we move through, we're going to have monthly webinars coming up, so hopefully people will be energized to join in every month and see what's going on within the biological heritage. And Daniel will be taking the lead role for the next one, so we'll have turn in, turn out, but it's my privilege and my pleasure to do this first welcome. So let me start with a little bit of housekeeping. If you're having trouble getting into the webinar, there's actually a webinar help guide that's in the handout section in the dashboard, which you'll see there. So there's a PDF there that you can open if you're having problems getting in. If you're experiencing sound issues, go to the audio panel that's at the side of your screen and select sound check. You should be able to resolve any issues that you're having within there. In terms of questions, as we move through the webinar, if you go to the questions section, you'll be able to post questions as well. So we're going to have Carwyn doing a presentation for 15 minutes, and that will be followed up by 15 minutes of question and answer time. So half an hour for us today, 15 and 15. So we're going to do our best to answer all of your questions that come up in the Q&A session. But if we run out of time, we'll try and follow up on those questions sometime after the webinar. Alrighty. So the kōrero, the kaupapa of the day is around part of the Biological Heritage SO7 we fondly call it, and it's around adaptive governance and policy. So the adaptive governance and policy team aims to break the mold and build new systems, policies and capability that will provide much greater protection to our biological heritage. This includes embracing treaty relationships for Māori and investigating the many opportunities for the environment that can arise when mana whenua are enabled as te tiriti partners and the government engages in co-design of policy and co-governance of natural resources. So the question how to talk about co-governance of our biological heritage is the title of a short guide that's been put together by the Adaptive Governance and Policy team. It's a short guide for communicators and advocates of environmental management and policy, commissioned by the Adaptive Governance and Policy team and led by the workshop. So the guide provides recommendations and tools on how to have effective conversations on the significance of mana whenua-led environmental management. So this guide is going to be the focus of the webinar today, and it's my pleasure to introduce Carwyn Jones from Te Wānanga o Raukawa, who co-leads this investment with Maria Barge from Victoria University of Wellington. And as I said, we'll have 15 minutes for the presentation from Carwyn, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and question and answer time. And Jess Berenson-Shaw, who's from the workshop, will be involved in that question and answer time at the end as well. So without any more kōrero from me, I'd like to hand over to you, Carwyn, to do your presentation. Kia ora, Carwyn.
Kia ora, Shaun. Tēnā koe mō o kupu whakatuwhera o tēnei kauhau hui kōrero wānanga. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. So Shaun's given you a little bit of an outline about what we're doing within Strategic Outcome 7, which is all about adaptive governance and policy. And really what we're aiming to work on is thinking about how to enable people to build biological heritage resilience, and particularly with the right policy and governance instruments. So we're sort of working on the basis that as biodiversity continues to decline in Aotearoa, that suggests that the current governance models and policies are not protecting species in their habitats, and sometimes are further contributing to their decline. So what we're aiming to do is to think about ways in which governance and policy needs to change, and a key part of that, as Shaun has already indicated, is ensuring that mana whenua in particular, but Māori, are enabled as te tiriti partners through the governance in relation to te taiao, the natural environment. And we're aware that currently there are lots of emerging opportunities for us to act on kind of new approaches to managing our biological heritage and starting to make a difference at both local and regional levels in particular. And just to give you an indication of some of the work that we're doing in this space, to put in context the short guide that I'll come to focus on in a minute, is that we have looked at, for example, working across these three key research areas, so evaluation of governance and policy options, informing environmentally sustainable business and financial models, and providing tools to organisations and individuals to partner better with Māori, particularly around co-design and co-governance. And of course, the short guide falls very firmly within that last research area that we're working on. But just to give you a bit of a sense of some of the other things that we've been doing within this area, SO 7, is that we have been produced a report on, or commissioned a report, I should say, biodiversity instruments, which identified unrealised opportunities for increasing investment into projects that preserve and support and expand Aotearoa's unique biological heritage, and we're extending some of that work on climate finance research as well. We have a number of case studies in train looking at co-governance arrangements in relation to local government around Aotearoa, and also a range of case studies looking at forms of Māori governance as well. We've had a short film festival where we asked people to enter a short film exploring or expressing their future visions for te taiao, and we've got a really amazing kind of range of different visions and different styles of films there, so trying to get people engaged with thinking about what they would like to see in terms of te taiao. And we're working with a team to explore what te tiriti-led governance of our biodiversity means as well. But the focus of today's webinar is on the short guide on how to talk about co-governance of our bioheritage that we've worked with the workshop to produce, and so we had a number of wānanga discussion sessions with Jess and her team from the workshop to think about how we might ways of talking about co-governance of our bioheritage. So, as I mentioned, this sort of fits quite neatly within thinking about providing tools for progressing issues relating to co-governance. And that research area 3 that I mentioned, it focused on thinking about public narratives and in particular about how they might be currently preventing change in governance and policy. One of the things that we know is that public understanding is a key component to implementing new systems and structures, and particularly this is an area that Jess and her team at the workshop engage with across a range of different topic areas, in terms of thinking about understanding the public narratives and how to work to try and encourage public narratives that support change and systemic change. So one of the things that we've identified in this space is that a significant barrier to developing resilient bioheritage in terms of co-governance, in terms of governance mechanisms, is the existing shared understanding about Māori and non-Māori relationships, about te tiriti o Waitangi, about shared decision-making processes, and because public support, because the kind of demand for systems change depends on having public support for that. It's difficult to achieve that change if the public, the kind of dominant narratives that the public has about these ideas is either shallow sometimes or unproductive or unhelpful to building effective solutions. So part of what we're trying to do with this work is to understand what the kind of narrative landscape is, what are the kind of dominant narratives around what people's understanding and way in which they talk about co-governance, and how to encourage more productive narratives as well. And so the guide that the workshop has produced for us is how to talk about co-governance of our bioheritage, and it's really aimed at people who are going to be engaged in discussions about co-governance, about management of te taiao, the natural environment, and advocates for environmental management and policy. And that's building on the discussions that we had with the workshop team. Just to give you a little bit of a taste, I won't be going through the report in detail, and we've got Jess on the line here who will be tuning in for able to answer some of your questions as well. But essentially, in terms of the work that we did with the workshop, and as I say, this is work that they do across a whole range of different subject areas, but some of the things that we talked about were thinking about these kind of 5 building blocks really of narratives for change, and again, Jess is probably much better equipped to talk about that than me, but essentially we're thinking about ideas around who the audience is that we're trying to communicate with, how we can lead with a concrete vision for a better world, how we can connect that with people and provide better explanations and narratives to foster that change. So you see there on the slide in terms of thinking about what this looks like in terms of co-governance in the bioheritage space is if we think about how we might lead with a kind of concrete shared vision. Well, one of the things that we talked about is thinking about a flourishing taiao or natural environment that has balanced decision making with tangata whenua and tangata tiriti thriving as a result. So there's a kind of shared outcome that we want to get to. In terms of the audience of thinking about who we're trying to address this communication with, one of the things that Jess and her team talked to us about is trying not to focus on people who are not persuadable, but rather think about who are the persuadable people, who are people who, rather than those who are actively opposed to these kinds of messages, look for and talk to people who care about the kaupapa but need effective communications to draw them in. And also thinking about how we connect with what matters to people. So we talked about a number of kind of key values that might be helpful to surface in the context of the te taiao and co-governance. Some of the key ideas that we talked about, key values that we talked about, were ideas around thinking about self-direction, about equity, in order to help people to understand the importance of co-governance and tangata whenua-led environmental management. And so that leads us to thinking about how we frame up some of these communications using ideas around leadership and solidarity. And I'll just come to look at some framing examples on the next slide here. So we've got just a couple of examples. There are many more in the short guide that you can look at and think about how kind of to ensure that when you're talking about co-governance in relation to BioHeritage, that you're avoiding using a framing that is unhelpful to producing constructive change, and try and use the kind of framing and narrative that will help to move people towards more productive change. And so again, the kinds of frames that you might want to avoid are setting up us versus them kinds of ideas, as you can see there on the slide. So thinking about people who live rurally are more impacted by biodiversity loss than those living in the city. So that's setting up kind of an us versus them, two different kinds of groups there. And similarly, we don't want to try and position one group as the savior of another, but rather try and embrace the kinds of narratives and frames that are picking up on those ideas, those values of solidarity, that are tapping into the idea of a collective benefit and a shared benefit here. So things like the example here in the slide, through co-governance partnerships, we can effectively care for our environment, protect our biodiverse ecosystems. To do this, we need to support the efforts of hapu and iwi, who hold deep knowledge of their local environments and potential solutions, and need to ensure mana whenua lead in decisions that benefit our interconnected ecosystems. So drawing on those ideas of the collective benefit that comes from thinking about co-governance in the bioheritage space. All right, I think that's pretty much come to the end of my time here, and we can move into the question and answer session.
Kia ora, Carwyn. Thank you for that, much appreciated. Alrighty, we'll move into the question and answer session. Now, we can pull two questions together here. So if we start, we've got a question asking about the workshop and Jess. So there's actually a question here also, which is for Jess. So if I can direct this question towards you, Jess, it's how did you get into the narratives for change work research, and why is this work so important? So if we turn to you, Jess, and maybe if you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the workshop too, so that it answers two questions in one. Kia ora. I think she might be muted, is she? Yeah. We need to we just need to unmute Jess. Can we do that? Or maybe if I direct that question to you, Carwyn, in the meantime, yep. Once we get her in, she can jump in. Kei te pai? I know you're muted as well.
Okay, I've unmuted myself.
Ka pai, there you go.
So can you just repeat what your question was,
So
Shaun?
we've kind of got two questions in one. Firstly, it's a little bit of an introduction about who the workshop are and introducing Jess Berenson-Shaw. And then from there, a question around the narratives for change work and research. How did that kind of work start, and why is that work so important?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, these are questions which Jess would be much better placed to answer than me. But in the meantime, the workshop.
Oh, here she is.
I think
here she is
online.
Kia ora, Jess. No, can't hear her. Back to you, perhaps, Carwyn.
Okay. So Jess will have to forgive me if I mischaracterize the nature of the workshop. But the team that we worked with there, the workshop do a range of, and some of you might have encountered some of their work before, very much engaged in thinking about how to have productive conversations for change, and how to construct narratives that might help having some of those conversations. And as I understand it, and again, I don't really want to speak for Jess, but as I understand it, Jess has come from a background of working in research, and had was really wondered why, when you put evidence before people that change is necessary, why that doesn't automatically lead to people adopting that change. You know, we often tend to think as researchers, well, if we have all the evidence laid out, then rationally you just work through that, give people the evidence, and they then work on the change that needs to happen. But of course, that's not the way things happen. And a lot of the work that Jess has done has looked at the way in which actually people's actions are much more likely to be motivated by the values that they hold. And people hold a whole range of different values all at once. It's not as though you only act on one value. And so the work that Jess and the workshop do is trying to think about how to identify what are the values that might be useful to surface in order to have some of these conversations that might lead towards more productive change, to encourage people to think about what evidence says and how to act on that in the best kind of way. If you look at some of the work that the workshop has done, it's across a whole range of different subject areas, but all thinking about how to try and get people to act on the kind of best evidence and research that's available there as well. And so that was a really important part of, in terms of us thinking about governance and policy in the biodiversity or bioheritage space, and how to make change there, being very aware that if we wanted to make change, then it needed public support and buy-in, in fact, demand for change. And so needing to begin to have those conversations that help people to both understand what we're talking about when we talk about co-governance or te tiriti, but also help to progress those conversations towards active change, towards building those into our decision-making processes, particularly around te tai ao.
Oh, kia ora, Carwyn. Kia ora. A little bit of, there's been a few questions around access to resources, and you'll see that there's one question there about, is there a place for us to see the future visions for Te Tai Ao video? So those are going to be made available online very soon. There's been a response there. Another question about a link to the guide that was mentioned. Hopefully you can all see the URL for that link to the guide that's in there. Now we've got a bit of a tough question here for you, Carwyn. Hopefully it's not too tough, but have a go at it. It's given how risk averse the Crown is, what suggestions do you have for engaging the Crown agencies on co-governance?
Yeah, so I mean, this is very much sort of part of our thinking around this work. So the short guide we had in mind thinking about tangata tiriti and thinking about Crown officials and people who might be engaged in this kind of work. And again, one of the things I think which we start to see coming out just from the short guide, and this is work which is continuing too, I should say, we're sort of trying to deepen this work and think about also how to talk about te no rangatiratanga, which forms an important part of co-governance. But one of the things that we, with the workshop, we drew out of some of our discussions was thinking about the kind, you know, trying to see this not as a zero-sum game kind of equation, but to have these conversations which really frame the narrative around that collective well-being and building on these ideas of solidarity and equity in particular, but also seeing that actually where we want to get to, the kind of vision of where this leads, this work around co-governance, is a vision that people will buy into, in the sense of having a flourishing te tai ao, having people who are connected to te tai ao and who are flourishing as well. And so the idea that certainly one of the ways in which we would encourage people to have conversations with government is to think about that vision of where we want to get to, and to think about that there's a real collective benefit in doing this. That this is not something that is going to be scary in the sense of sort of losing a whole lot of benefit. It might be a little bit scary in terms of thinking about who's involved in decision making, in the sense of at the moment government controls a lot of decision making and will need to relinquish some of that. But there are ways of having those conversations which demonstrate the kind of collective benefit and mutual benefit which comes from that.
Kia ora, Carwyn. It's actually, that question has resulted in a whole lot of other questions that have come through. Just really quickly, there's a question here about what forums might be most effective in having these conversations, do you think?
Yeah, gee, that's a really good question. So I guess one of the things that's come out of this work and that Jess and her team would tell you is that, as I mentioned, it's really important to try and think about having conversations with people who are persuadable. You know, there's in some sense you might have a lot of people who are already well in support of thinking about co-governance, and it's good to have those conversations with them. But in terms of moving the discussion on and the more transformative change, we need to be bringing more people around to thinking about co-governance as well.
Yeah.
So there's a whole range of different forums in which that can take place, but I guess it's really more thinking about what are the ways in which you gather that audience together, what are the ways in which you bring those people together.
Cool. Okay. Wow, these questions are coming through thick and fast. We've got 3 minutes left, Carwyn. We'll do our best to cover what we can do in that 3 minutes. A related question to that last one. Surely this must be more effective if led by Māori. Is it an insurmountable challenge to have effective narratives? Is it an insurmountable challenge to have effective narratives if you are not Māori?
Well, so I mean, this is partly comes back to the audience, right? So there will be some audiences for which it's much more effective to have Māori leading the conversation, and there'll be some audiences for which tangata tiriti communicators are really important. So it's really important that we think about the roles that allies can take in this work. So in terms of thinking about the kind of vision of what tino rangatiratanga involves and what Māori aspirations are, of course that substantively has to be led by Māori. But in terms of having those discussions about communicating what change that might need, there are going to be a range of different communicators who are effective for different kinds of audiences.
Oh, kia ora. Okay, one last very quick question. In our 1 minute that we've got left, we've got a question here. It seems to me that strengthening co-governance on Te Taiao and Aotearoa would benefit from the country acceding to the UN's AARHUS Convention, AARHUS Convention. I'm just wondering if you know anything about that convention, or if it's, yeah, we might need to get back to the question to that person on that. I'm just gonna squeeze in one more quick question to you. So co-governance at an individual iwi level is one thing. Any suggestions about working at regional or national levels? How to get multiple iwi to work together on a single co-governance model with the Crown? That's a very, very hard question for 30 seconds, but maybe just a quick entry into that, Carwyn, before we finish.
Yeah, so again, I mean, you're right. It's really important that we think about co-governance working at a whole lot of different levels. So from whānau, hapu, iwi, and multiple iwi as well. And the conversations, I think, all revolve around the same kinds of ideas about what's the shared vision that you want people to buy into and come together to try and achieve. And then, what are the conversations you can have that enable that. And so again, focusing on thinking about how we have those conversations that surface those values around equity and solidarity, and thinking about that, working towards that outcome of collective benefit and mutual benefit for that. So those conversations, yes, they need to be adapted across, you know, depending on the scale that you're working at and the number of kind of groups that are involved. But essentially, those underpinning ideas about how to begin those conversations, I think are transferable or adaptable across all of them.
Oh, cool. Sounds awesome, Carwyn. Alrighty, well, this time has run out way quicker than I was expecting, and way quicker than I would have preferred. But we've run out of time. I have to wind things up. Firstly, a huge thank you to you, Carwyn, and to the team for the presentation and the great mahi that's going on. Everybody that's joined in, the attendees, thank you all for finding time for us. And you'll note, if you can access the short guide, it's all in there, useful information there. A huge apology to the people that asked questions which we weren't able to cover here, but we will do our best. We've got those questions, we've got them all available there to us, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. We'll follow up with answers to the questions as best we can over the coming few days, over the coming weeks, perhaps. A big thanks to everyone. It's been a pleasure to have hosted this first of the Biological Heritage webinars, and I'll just finish us off now with having opened this up with the karakia at the start. I'll just finish us off now with a bit of a karakia to close. Nō reira, kia koutou katoa, he tino mihi kia koutou, he tino mihi o te wā nei. Nō reira, kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā. Manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, kei rungi te āhuatanga o te wā nei, nō reira, ai o ki te aorangi. Kia ora koutou katoa.